This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. For the next 60 minutes, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from right across the continent. Quite a bit to get through, but let's start with the run through the markets here for you. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, frankly, with only essentially one closure lower, and that essentially was Thursday's numbers. Overall, the markets here not doing particularly badly. MTN has made a string of new appointments to the board, heavyweight across the board here. Deputy Finance Minister, former Deputy Finance Minister in South Africa, the former central bank governor of Nigeria. The markets seem to like that news. It shares are up 1.16% higher earlier in the day. At those levels, up nearly 18% so far in the year. Also on the Kenyan side, after May 2nd surge, Safaricom shares did fall back quite a bit today, down nearly 1.9% at 11:29 GMT. The company did report a very strong set of earnings. We're going to go through that in just a moment. Here's what's coming up tonight. We'll be looking at which companies are vying for oil swap contracts in Nigeria. Iran says it will not surrender to US pressure amid oil sanctions. And more Nigerian startups are gunning for millions of online customers locally and abroad. All right, then let's start tonight in Nigeria. The state-owned oil company over there, NNPC, has officially opened bids for this year's direct sale of crude oil and direct purchase to its local and international partners, or oil swap contracts if you want to refer to them that way. According to the company, about 132 firms submitted bids for the products swap program. Now, the scheme is aimed at reducing Nigeria's total cost of importing refined petroleum products. Here's CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam starting us off tonight.
Officials from the National Petroleum Company opening hundreds of bids for direct purchase of crude oil from Africa's largest oil producer, Nigeria. Despite being the largest crude oil producer in Africa, it lacks the capacity to refine enough fuel for the domestic market. Nigeria has an installed refining capacity of 445,000 barrels per day, but all the refineries are obsolete and barely capable of refining up to a quarter of their installed capacity. So the country spends billions of dollars on refined fuel to feed its local market of 50 million liters per day. This open bid process at the NNPC headquarters in Abuja was launched 3 years ago to cut down the cost of imports by selling directly to offshore refineries. Nigeria will then import refined fuel from those refineries instead of sourcing in costly open markets. The state-owned petroleum company says the scheme has significantly cut costs of imports on refined petroleum products.
The 2019-2020 DSTV tender objectives include engaging reputable, qualified companies for the direct sales of Nigerian crude oil and direct purchase of petroleum products. And it also is going to be ensuring selection of off-takers which are aligned with the tested, transparent and accountable procedures in compliance with the Public Procurement Act and the Nigerian Content Act.
Nigeria spent almost $6 billion on imported petroleum products last year. Its government is battling to reduce that cost. It has recently launched a program to revamp 4 of its domestic refineries. It hopes to end the country's reliance on imported fuel with the completion of Dangote's 650,000 barrel per day refinery capacity. But that will not happen until refined products start flowing out of those refineries sometime next year.
This is a process that we cannot afford to play around with. The scheme prices itself with a competitive pricing framework, as you heard from the GGM, which is even lower than the PPRA benchmark, which over the years has ensured significant reduction in product demurrage and costs in the range of 84%, and cost savings of over $2.2 billion from inception.
Since its inception, the DSTV has ensured that 29.5 million metric tons of petroleum products, equivalent of 39.6 billion litres, have been supplied to the country. But this is clearly a remedial measure. The government is insistent on having all fuel for domestic consumption refined locally. That way, it can place a lid on foreign currency reversal and save enough to diversify the economy. Kelechi Emekalam, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, then, quite a few interesting things to go through as far as the extent of the oil swaps are concerned. So let's bring in Deji Badmus, who joins us now live from Lagos with a lot more data on this story. So Deji, of the 132 firms that put in bids for these direct sale, direct purchase deals, how many of them were domestic Nigerian companies compared to foreign ones?
Well, Ramah, we have no idea. Those details are not revealed, but from what we have seen, it would appear there were more local companies than foreign ones. I mean, most of the local companies, of course, as you would expect, are trading companies, and they were paired with the foreign companies now. That, of course, the majority of those foreign companies are refiners, and of course, some trading companies. But in terms of the actual balance, that was not revealed.
So there were some pretty large fuel shortages last year, since the planning assumption for the swap deals then was predicated on the consumption of about 35 million litres a day, not the actual figures we saw of at least 55 million litres a day. So what consumption estimates are being used this time round for these one-year swap deals?
Well, I would think that too has not been revealed. I mean, you know, what happens is usually this whole bidding process, there are certain aspects of the bidding process that are actually opaque, basically known to both the NNPC now and the bidders. But I would assume that it will be in the region of 40 million litres per day, because, I mean, you just have to do the mathematics. NNPC says he hopes to deliver around 14 billion litres within the 1 year period. They are looking at they're looking at trading basically 14 cargoes. So when you break that down, so it means you're looking at for the 1 year period, you're looking at for every month, you're looking at probably 1 billion litres. So we're looking at 14 billion litres here. And so that might approximate to around 40 million litres per day. But the fact, Ramah, is that I'm not so sure that Nigeria knows categorically how much petrol it consumes on a daily basis. The figures keep hovering between, sometimes you would hear 30 million, sometimes 35. Of course, as you said, the last time it was 35. So the estimation is that when you do an incremental estimate now, then there's every likelihood that this time it will be around 40 million or 45.
Indeed, we'll see how the math does work out later on in terms of actual demand. But let's move on to some claims from the NNPC. They say the country saved over $2 billion just by switching over to these swap deal systems instead of the system they had before. But explain how those savings were arrived at, because crude prices in that period of time have gone up by at least 30%, and the value of the naira against the dollar has also fallen.
Well, from the explanation given by the managing director of NNPC, most of the savings came from demurrage. I mean, that in the past they would have to pay demurrage, and because of the process they used in the past, that's the offshore processing agreement. That agreement would, according to him now, created room for demurrage. So you would have a situation where they would have to spend so much money on demurrage. So that what they have been able with the current agreement, that's the refined petroleum exchange agreement that they have now, that demurrage has basically been eliminated by about 80%, over 80%. That's what he said. So that's where the bulk of the savings are coming from, and that's the reason why he's giving an estimate of $2.2 billion. So it basically tells you that with the previous agreement, the country was basically spending so much on demurrage.
Indeed. One last question for you, Deji, and I know we've had this conversation for years now, but the existing refineries, where is the government in its long-stated plans to revamp them or privatize them, or are those plans completely off the table?
I don't think so. They are not off the table, but then you still cannot, you can't stop the supply of petrol. The plans are very much on the table. This plans are long term. So you can't say because you want to revamp the refineries, you would stop importing petrol, you would stop the DSTV arrangement. So the plan is still very much on the table. As you know, of course, the government has been courting Saudi Aramco now to come invest, and we understand there are actually a consortium of companies now that have shown interest. But so far, nothing. We haven't heard anything yet, other than that buzz we got the week before now that Saudi Aramco was going to come invest in the old refineries and probably build a new one. But don't forget, Ramah, Aliko Dangote is building a 650,000 barrel per day refinery. That is what everyone is looking at. That's what everyone is looking up to. People are not looking up to the government for refineries because, look, we've had several turnaround maintenance on those refineries, and up till this moment, they've still not been able to produce even up to 50% of their capacity. So I think the future, going forward, what the country is looking at to bail it out of this subsidy regime and out of this difficult situation it's found itself now with refined petrol, it's a Dangote refinery. So everyone just can't wait for that refinery to become operational. And of course, with 650,000 barrels per day, that is more than what even the 4 refineries put together. You know, the combined capacity now of the four refineries. So it means with 650, well, we just may be able, the Dangote refinery may be able to meet Nigeria's local consumption, and they'll still have significant amount of refined petrol now to export and, of course, make money.
Indeed. Let's see how much hair I lose before those refineries are actually brought to market. Deji Badmus in Lagos, thank you very much. Now, the UK's Foreign Secretary, Jeremy Hunt, has reassured Kenya that the trade relationship between the UK and Kenya will remain the same once the UK leaves the European Union. He's already toured Nigeria, Ghana, Senegal and Ethiopia. And Mr. Hunt continues to push diplomatic efforts across Africa, and he's covering a whole range of topics: climate change, good governance, foreign investments, and of course, as you just heard, trade. Here's CGTN's Wilkis Tenyabwa with this report.
Shortly after his arrival in Kenya, Britain's Foreign Secretary Jeremy Hunt met with a Kenyan delegation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for bilateral talks. His visit is part of a 5-day, 5-nation tour of Africa aimed at trying to convince the continent that Britain's decision to exit the European Union will not hurt African countries' trade partnerships with the United Kingdom. Hunt was intent on preparing Kenya for the possibility of a Brexit agreement. In the event that Britain successfully negotiates its departure from the EU, the UK government is looking to boost trade with Africa. It's also pushing to exert its influence on a continent which appears to have turned to the east.
Our trade with Kenya is very, very important to the UK, as it is with South Africa and all the countries in Africa, and we are absolutely committed and absolutely confident that we will be able to maintain the same very favourable trading relationship that we currently have. Primary focus of our relationship needs now to become business and investment, and the UK is the largest investor in Kenya. Very proud to do that.
And both countries have determined that this relationship is of value, and we have agreed on how to improve that value. So, but most significantly, the leadership in the UK has assured us repeatedly from the highest level that the relationship as far as our trade is concerned remains and will continue to be so. So no worries at all.
The trip has also given Hunt a chance to set out his views on immigration, with the UK growing increasingly concerned about the Sahel region of north-central Africa as a source of migration, owing to the instability in Libya and Sudan. Hunt's Africa tour comes just months after British Prime Minister Theresa May also visited the continent focusing on countries where the UK has traditionally played a smaller role. Wilkes Anyabo, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
All right, then a quick run through some company news now. Let's start in Kenya. The government has written off some $239 million it lent to the country's national carrier, Kenya Airways. That amount accounts for 89% of the $269 million in loans that were written off in favor of various state corporations, government agencies and other organizations in the last year. For KQ, that write-off is a pretty big deal because the airline reported a loss of $75 million for the year ending in December 2018. On South Africa, the telecoms giant MTN has appointed the former Deputy Finance Minister of the country as chair designate. It's the latest in a series of regulatory issues that has cost the firm more than $1 billion. Jonas will be taking over from Putuma Neko, who has been at the helm of the telco for more than 3 years now. The World Bank has increased emergency support for countries that have been hit by Cyclone Idai to $700 million. Devastated countries are long: Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, Mozambique, not to mention island nations. They will all receive at least $350 million to re-establish water supply, rebuild damaged public infrastructure, and support efforts to prevent disease outbreaks. And Europe's biggest bank by assets, HSBC Holdings, beat forecasts after it reported a 31% rise in first quarter profit. Operating expenses were down 12% in the January to March quarter. Profit before tax rose to $6.2 billion from $4.76 in the same quarter last year, well above the average estimate of $5.58 billion by analysts. And that is a run through your headlines. It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll take a look at our special coverage ahead of South Africa's general elections, this time focusing on the agricultural sector, which is a strong contributor to the country's economy. And we'll also be looking at Safaricom's earnings for the 2018-2019 fiscal year.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sutra Nairobi. Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to
to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues for taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Welcome back. We're focusing on our special coverage of South Africa ahead of the upcoming elections next week. Tonight we're focusing on South Africa's agricultural sector. Contributes to about 10% of South Africa's total export earnings at a value of over $10 billion. But remember, just 1% of all agricultural land is in the ownership of black farmers, and just over $35 million of local government funding has been going towards land reform since 2014. Now, needless to say, it's a pressing issue at both local and national government. CGTN's Travis Andrews filed this report.
Like the rest of South Africa, the agricultural industry is critical to the Western Cape's economy. It contributes roughly 35% to the regional GDP and is the largest employer of unskilled labor in the country. In fact, more than 30,000 jobs were created in the agri and agri-processing industry in the third and fourth quarter of 2018. And now, even against the backdrop of the drought, the local government promises nothing less. But it's a sector that remains largely untransformed, especially in the wine industry, where the barriers to entry for black farmers are just too prohibitive.
Many of the current wine farmers made their money elsewhere before they went into wine farming. So for a new entrant who is black and from a previously disadvantaged community, it is virtually impossible to do so without grant funding.
It is a vexing issue then, in which the national government has to balance grant funding to black farmers, food security issues, and fostering a sustainable agricultural industry. But with profit margins of just 1% in traditional markets such as Europe, wine farmers have had to diversify the interest to stay afloat. And that over-the-top investments in the businesses have also made barriers to entry for new entrants even more financially prohibitive.
Fact is that right now you're not dealing with farms in these cases, but with real estate. And the improvements on these lands cost a pretty penny, because a cellar can go into millions of dollars if you want to put up a proper cellar, and I'm talking about US dollars now.
But land expropriation without compensation is one step which is being touted to redress the current level of transformation. But the jury is still out on whether this effectively will speed up transformation in the industry. Many black farmers believe land expropriation without compensation is not the be-all and end-all of their problems. And many believe the government needs to take a more proactive step in dealing with the situation.
There should be a definite end to the rhetoric and the sloganeering, and implement expropriation without compensation, and don't pay these farmers anymore unless it is found there's exceptional cases where people need to be compensated. And that should only happen in exceptional situations where people are being paid. So that is the first thing.
So while most farms have turned to new ways to mitigate the effects of the drought, others have turned to innovative ways to speed up inclusivity and shared ownership, which will no doubt become an important economical and social issue before and after this year's elections. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
South Africa, of course, is famous for its vineyards and wine exports to the global market. Now, despite the pressure that's coming in from climate change and access to a much more global market in various countries around the world, the wine industry is still pretty promising. Earlier today, my colleague Uche Koronko toured the Groot Constantia estate, established in 1685 in Cape Town. It's the oldest single vineyard in Africa.
The Groot Constantia is the oldest wine farm in South Africa, going back to 1685. So celebrating more than 3 centuries of winemaking here.
Give me a sense of how much wine you produce here and what are the different varieties you have to offer.
Groot Constantia today is 140 hectares, so that's about 300 acres under total. Under vineyard, it's about just short of 100 hectares. So in a good year, we produce between 500 to 600 tons of grapes, and that'll yield between 400 to 500,000 bottles. So just short of 500,000 bottles a year that we do.
Wow. Wow. Now, you're not just a vineyard, you're also a restaurant, you provide different services. Give us a sense of what it has to offer. Yeah.
That's correct. We're very close, that we are 15 minutes from the city centre, so we're literally on in the southern suburbs of Cape Town. You know, if you look over there, you'll see all our neighbours' residential area. So the proximity to Cape Town means there's a lot of visitors. We get again 450,000 people visiting the farm last year, so it's a very popular tourist destination. On the farm we have 2 restaurants, Jonkershuis restaurant over my shoulder and Simon's just behind the production cellar. So yeah, 2 cellars. There are also, because of the historical background, there's the museums as well. There's a cultural museum, as well as the old production cellar with a bit of winemaking history as well. And the production cellar open for visiting cellar tours and vineyard tours 7 days a week. So yeah, very, very popular tourist destination as well.
Now, what happens with the wine you produce here? Is it sold locally? Do you import it internationally? Give us a sense of what.
Most of the wine, so a lot of the wine sold off the farm. We sell about 25% of the wine from the estate. You can imagine, with nearly 500,000 people, there's a very big demand for wine on the farm here, especially the 2 restaurants. Yeah, 50% of the wine sold locally, and then 50% export. And exports spread pretty evenly across the globe: America, UK, Northern Europe, Germany, Belgium, Netherlands. And then trying to establish a market in China. China is quite a small part of the business at the moment. So I've already been there. Our vineyard manager has been there. Our CEO has been there. So we are trying to get a stronger foothold in China as well.
Right. What about other markets across Africa? What are some of the markets you're looking to expand into? Some of the new markets you're hoping to target going forward?
I've been to Kenya, your beautiful country. Not really successful, unfortunately, establishing a market there. In conversation with Nigeria as well. So we're definitely looking at expanding in Africa as well. There's amazing potential in Africa. There's a lot of excitement in Africa. So we'd really love to venture, like I said, specifically Kenya and Nigeria. But yeah, we're still working on it.
Now, South African wine is actually quite popular, not just in Africa, across the world. What would you say the industry has been like in the past few years? Are you seeing strong competition from other new markets, or is South African wine growing in popularity?
It's definitely growing, not as quickly as we would like, but it's definitely growing. Again, taking the US, which is the biggest market, US just boomed over the last 10 years. And South Africa didn't really get a piece of the pie. But you take very strong markets like the UK, for instance, you know, we're slightly increasing. The size of the industry, so it's tricky to say, the size of the industry is shrinking at the moment. You know, the vineyard industry, the winemaking industry is tough, and we've probably shrunk by the vineyard size. Probably shrunk from 102,000 hectares to about 92,000 hectares over the last 10 years. So it's slightly smaller. But where we're going to is we need to sell more bottle wine in the overseas market, not bulk wine. Bulk wine is not really very profitable. So, but from that point of view, we are seeing the bottle wine increasing in our biggest markets, and also the average price point increasing in the big markets like the UK. Right. So that's where we are. So yeah, so it's not an expanding production and an expanding market. It's very slow growth, but like I said, you know, we're looking at increasing bottle prices, and we're slowly getting there.
Now, you mentioned the market is shrinking. Give me a sense of what the challenges are that has led to this, you know, shrinkage.
Farming cost is getting very expensive, and the prices we realize, especially in the export market, it's not really where we would like it to be. So you mentioned other countries as well. Chile and Argentina obviously been making wine for a very long time, but very strong competition for us in a lot of our popular markets, US and UK. Right. So yeah, Australia, New Zealand also, they're interesting. Spain as well, Spain, Italy, but yeah, new world markets like Chile and Argentina, big competition for us.
Now, you mentioned the US a lot. It's one of your biggest markets.
That's correct.
Did you benefit from the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, the AGOA?
No, not really. No, not really. It's very tricky. America is it's a tricky market for us at the moment. On the one hand, you need big brands. You know, you need a big brand, because America is such a big market. To really sort of go above the line and advertise, you need a very strong brand to really sort of establish South Africa as a brand there. And there's not really a producer that's big enough to take on. take on the American market. So, AGOA as such is great, but we haven't really seen any benefits now.
Now, the UK, Europe, those are two of your other big markets.
That's correct.
How do you think Brexit is going to impact how South Africa?
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. We'd like to think that Brexit will benefit South Africa, and the first thing is just get it over and done with, because I think that you can see that everyone in the UK is nervous, so they're not spending. So you can see that the spend is really down in the UK over the last few years, and yeah, we've seen our markets also a bit shrunk in the UK. So, but yeah, sort of losing trade agreements with Europe will definitely benefit South Africa, but not only us. Like I said, our competition like Chile, Argentina, Australia, I'm sure that they're also sitting there waiting for similar opportunities. So, but I know Theresa May was in South Africa recently, so yeah, whether she'll be in power for much longer after Brexit, that's still to be seen, if Brexit is going to happen. But we'll see. So, but there is some optimism that there might be opportunities for us.
Now, bringing it back home to South Africa, you do have an election coming soon. What especially does the wine market want to see from the next government in terms of boosting the agriculture sector and ensuring that South Africa's wine industry, thrives?
Well, the first thing you need is stability. I think it's really tricky to operate in the market because we export, so obviously a lot of our income is exchange rate related, and then also imports. Barrels and corks are imported, so I think just a more stable currency will also make life a lot easier for us. So stability, and then if we can get some support, there's very little support in the agricultural sector at the moment. So just some support, whether it's there are some benefits, fuel or whatever, some benefits. I know that the president was in contact with a few wine growers in Stellenbosch a couple of weeks ago. So yeah, we are optimistic that there's always a bit of instability before an election. So we just hope for more stability and then some support after the elections.
And that's a wrap of our week-long coverage of some of the most pressing issues facing South Africa out of the elections. On the 8th of May, some 26 million voters will be heading to the polls. CGTN Africa will be there to bring you the latest. Right, then let's get back to East Africa. Kenya's Betting Control and Licensing Board has been making the news in the last 48 hours. It's banned advertising and gambling on all social media platforms, as it were. In a directive issued on the 30th of April, the board banned many forms of advertising that have effectively been helping betting and gambling firms win their clients. That includes outdoor ads, social media adverts, TV, radio ads. All of those are now off and essentially banned from the watershed period, anywhere between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Any endorsement of any betting or gambling operations by celebrities, that's also been banned. Under these new rules, any gambling or betting advertising needs to get approval from the regulator, and it will also be required to contain a warning of potential addiction. That has to occupy at least a third of that ad. Investors and betting firms have until the 30th of June this year to comply with these new regulations. So then, let's examine this and its effects on the industry. Ken Gishinga, the CEO at Mentoria Consulting, is with me in studio right now. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, your initial impressions, what did you make of these new ideas, these new rules?
I think the ban couldn't have come any sooner. Gambling is a vice, and gambling is destroying our youth. And Kenya has a very young population. The median age in Kenya is 19 years. So this is a generation that's highly impressionable, and many of them have got caught up into addiction. So I think this is something that needed to have happened much sooner.
But given the fact that a lot of this betting activity, because really that's the fastest growing element of it, a lot of the betting activity in this country operates on mobile. So to that extent, how effective is it really to then say, okay, I'm going to ban outdoor ads, I'm going to ban TV ads, I'm going to ban radio ads? A lot of the activity is not happening there, it's happening on mobile.
I think the regulator has a long-term strategy. I think what they decided is to start with the most impressionable, which is what happens on TV, especially when they're watching the English Premier League matches live on TV. That's the most visible. I expect in the next few months to see further restrictions coming in on the mobile spaces, on the digital spaces.
Well, we're going to get to that in a moment, but given what you've just said, right, a lot of these guys will spend their ad spend, right, on high visibility things. So like, for instance, the English Premier League, extremely popular. You've got Sport Pesa, which is one of the bigger players in this market, who sponsor a team. I believe it's Everton. So, I mean, it's not like you're going to say the Interior Ministry is going to wake up and say, okay, we're going to ban the display of any EPL content. I mean, it still comes back to the question of, okay, you put in the ban, but this content will still get out there.
I mean, in their heart of hearts, I don't think they'll ever get rid of gambling completely. I think this is the first step of many steps, and I expect to see more sophisticated measures coming in much later.
But what about the social media side? Because that was a little unexpected. Social media, you and I both know this, it's a borderless thing. I can buy ads using a VPN that makes it look like I'm in the United States and have them flighted to an audience in Uganda, in Kenya, in South Africa. So isn't this really pointless?
You're right, social media is a wild, wild west of sorts. That said, it's not impossible. In fact, if you look at Facebook, they have an office in Johannesburg, and they're very, very open to feedback. If you look at in countries such as in the UK, where online bullying was a major problem, Facebook was engaged, and that has almost disappeared. So yes, it's much harder to regulate, but they are learning tools, and they are working closer and closer with governments.
Well, fair enough, but that's essentially a case of walking up to Facebook and saying, hey, look, you can't have any problematic advertising that targets people below the age of 18 who are using IP addresses from Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, which is a sensible business move. But beyond that, I mean, past 18, people are making their own decisions, right? And why would Facebook listen to the Kenyan government? Because they'll say, well, look, you've got Kenyan adults are making their choices, so why are you telling us to become your moral policeman?
No economic policy can legislate on morality. What governments can do is they can make some of these habits very expensive or very difficult to access. So at the end of the day, virtues are something that is taught in school. You can never teach virtues through economics or through any public policy. I think moving forward for them, and granted these regulators have limited budgets also, so they also have a limited sort of bandwidth in terms of what they can do, but the public expects them to be doing something, because every day you see young people committing suicides because of that. So I think there's a public expectation that the regulator also has to respond to.
Right, and of course I'd love to dive into the data, but that's a separate discussion altogether. But isn't this hypocritical? Because the state on one hand is saying, I'm going to ban adverts, right? But if the objective was to really slow down or make it difficult for more people to get into the betting and gaming side, why not go after the payment side? Because we haven't seen anything in this regulations about saying, for instance, if you're going to bet, you can't use an M-Pesa account, you can't use mobile money, drive you into something a little more expensive like the card business, for argument's sake.
That's a fantastic question, and it comes up quite often. When you have something like gambling, there's a supply side and there's a demand side. It's much easier to regulate the supply side. These are the people who are providing the adverts and the platforms for betting. It's much cheaper. It's much, much more expensive to regulate on the demand side, because it means having better, and the regulator does, as I said earlier, doesn't have an unlimited pass to do these things. So it's much easier to regulate the supply side, because all you have to do is place bans on media content, and that's it. But if you are to follow up on individual, that's a demand side, and coming up with sophisticated technology that can block M-Pesa transactions, that's a far more expensive venture. But you're right, anytime you curb a vice, you need to look at it from both the supply side and the demand side. But governments always prefer to start on the supply side.
And of course, they're still getting their tax bill at the end of the day, aren't they?
They are.
Right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Ken Gishinga from Mentoria, thank you very much. All right then, so let's focus on a few other things in East Africa. At a time when quite a few other listed companies were posting profit warnings or decline in earnings, Kenya's biggest telecoms operator had a very different story to tell in its earnings. It reported a 13.1% in full-year earnings, over $880 million coming in. Its mobile money unit was a key revenue driver, 19.2% rise in revenues from that division. It accounted for over 31% of the company's entire revenues. Now, according to the CEO, Bob Collymore, the service, which now has over 22 million users, will likely account for 50% of the company's revenues in another 3 to 4 years. The overdraft lending segment of M-Pesa that also gained 8.8 million users. They had borrowed anywhere between $400 to $444 million between them in that fiscal year. The data segment of the business, though, that didn't do quite as well. 6.4% annual growth in revenue compared to the prior year's figure of 24%. Now, in part, that's because the firm cut data prices by close to half, in part, partly in response to cuts at its combined competitor, Telkom and Airtel. Just under 19 million users consume data on its network, an average of 700 megabytes of data each month on Safaricom. Now, after 9 years in charge, Bob Collymore will not be renewing his contract as CEO of Safaricom later on in August. But figuring out who will succeed him has been the subject of reported boardroom disagreements between the firm's main shareholders, Vodafone UK and Kenya's government. Here's the perspective on that succession issue from Tracy Kivunyu of Telema.
I would say across the talent pool is quite robust. Vodafone UK has historically been the source of CEOs for Safaricom, and if that were to persist, there would be no problem going forward. Also in the Kenya segment, where there are rumors that the government would like a Kenyan CEO, there is local talent currently at Safaricom that would be more than able to carry the mantle. And for Vodacom, they've also had a very successful platform in South Africa. If we look at investors' concerns, they of course would be more they would be more excited about a Vodafone UK replacement, just to continue the status quo. That's the conservative end. But if you look at a dominance angle, it might make more sense to have a Kenyan CEO who might be able to have a better relationship in terms of navigating those discussions. So I think those two sides, Vodafone UK or a Kenyan CEO, might be the option that we'll see.
Now, Huawei is a key supplier to Safaricom, both for the mobile money infrastructure and also their core transmission network for cellular service. So when asked about concerns about the firm's cybersecurity, this is what the company CEO had to say earlier today, and I quote, "Our policy as a company is not going to be driven by Donald Trump. Donald Trump can drive some other stuff, but we will make independent decisions. Do we think that Huawei is a very competent service provider? Yes, absolutely. Do we have fights with them? Yes, but they have been a very competent and very close partner of ours over many years, and I hope they will continue to be so." Safaricom CEO Bob Collymore there. Time for another break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up. Iran vows not to surrender to US pressure amid oil sanctions. And Dubai steps up its game to attract a lot more Chinese tourists for this year's Expo 2020.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back. Let's turn to the US sanctions on Iran, where a special 6-month exemption for major buyers of Iranian crude expired without being extended. Tehran has struck a pretty defiant tone, saying it will not be bowing down to pressure from Washington. Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif made that statement while attending a ministerial meeting in Doha. The White House says it's looking to bring Iran's oil exports down to zero. CGTN's Jacob Greaves reports from Dubai on how the US decision might affect global oil markets.
The screws on Iranian crude output appear to be tightening, but will that impact the flow of supply for global oil markets? The answer might lie in OPEC. When announcing the end of waivers, the White House said it was working closely with top oil exporters, Saudi Arabia and here in the UAE, to ensure the market is adequately supplied. That raises the question of what extra capacity OPEC producers have.
It depends on how much Iran's exports are diminished. But let's say at the high end, Iran's exports might be reduced by 700,000 up to 1 million barrels per day. So then we've got the countries that would really step in would be Saudi Arabia, of course, which has something on the range of 2 million barrels a day spare capacity. The UAE, perhaps 300,000. Iraq, perhaps another 300,000. So in principle, there's ample spare capacity to make up for any loss from Iran. However, of course, Iran is not the only thing going on in the oil market. Venezuela's collapse is continuing, which threatens 600,000 or so barrels per day. There's fighting in Libya, that's 1 million barrels per day at risk. So if all these things were to come together, then the market would be much tighter.
Last week, oil prices dipped as US President Donald Trump again pressured OPEC to raise production. But some analysts say the eventual ending of US waivers on Iranian oil has already been factored into markets.
We believe this has largely priced in the removal of the waiver of Iranian crude. If you look at the oil production coming out of Iran, it has fallen more than 1 million barrels. The same for its export numbers. And because of that, the oil price have also been moving to new high, recently touching $74 before the tweet came out from Trump. So the price have moved quite a lot. We believe is largely priced in.
What Riyadh does next could be key. As it stands, an OPEC-led supply cut agreed with Russia is still in effect. And on Tuesday, Saudi Arabia said the deal could be extended beyond June to incorporate the rest of 2019. That's likely sent oil prices up. In all, they've surged almost 40% since January. Despite US pressure, it's not yet clear whether OPEC is a willing partner of the White House. Jacob Greaves, CGTN in Dubai.
Let's now go to the annual meeting of the Asian Development Bank. It took place in Fiji this time round. One of the key issues at this year's gathering is sustainable tourism, particularly how island nations can take advantage of their tourism resources, but at the same time take care of the ocean. So what exactly is Fiji doing to get it right? CGTN's Chung Lei finds out.
Fiji has more than 300 islands like this, drawing tourism that brings in $2 billion in revenues and creates 45,000 jobs. Pristine beaches, tropical weather, you can see why tourism contributes 40% of Fiji's GDP. But how do you stand out from the other tropical nations in the South Pacific, and how do you protect the ecology as well as the economy?
We're very conscious at Mala, very conscious. We've just started a coral planting program here on the island. We bring down the coral pieces from the Yosawas and we plant them here. We're very much where we educate our guests when they come down to water sports about where they should go, what they should do. Everything that we do as eco as possible, from our merchandise, which is bamboo cotton based, to paper straws, to takeaway boxes that are eco-friendly. Everything that we do, we have a recycling program. We crush all our glass and make it back into sand. So we try and balance it out. You know, the more guests we have, obviously there's more rubbish that we create. However, we've got a program in place to eliminate as much as possible.
When a small economy is driven by tourism, natural disasters can devastate.
The last few years, we have this Pacific Disaster Resilience Program, which is really providing many of our client countries across the region. Some of them have signed on to the program, the others are still in the process of signing on, But what it does is it provides them with contingent financing to deal with the aftermath of disaster, so they're able to cope and react faster. But before they can access this facility, they first will have to take on some significant policy reforms in changing their building codes and how they conduct their planning processes.
One way to strengthen the economy could be a stronger agriculture sector. And that effort is finding an ally in the country's chefs, who want Fiji to be known for its food as well as the beaches.
There's so much investment at the farming level. What they were essentially doing was helping the farmer, but the farmer had no connection to industry. So they'd be spending plenty of money on growing things and learning things, and they grow things, and then at the end of the harvest period, there's nowhere to sell it to. So what the chefs ended up doing was, we said, well, hang on a second, we can help. We can help, and it helps us. So if we can get access to more produce, it helps the farmer, it helps their livelihood. We bring that on the menu, and then now as an industry, the chefs now, we're talking more closely with Tourism Fiji to say, all right, you tell us as a government, you tell us when all these things are available. We'll then sit back and strategically plan our menus for the year. So if pineapple season's in March and April, then we'll change our menus to synchronise with the farm.
On top of the exciting cuisine to come, the winning ingredient for Fiji's tourism over other island economies could be in the bula.
What you have here, you have an absolutely brilliant Fijian personality. All right, you can't replace that anywhere in the world. All right, the Fijian people are beautiful, they're naturally hospitable, it comes from the heart, and I don't think you can beat that hospitable nature.
The Asian Development Bank is committing to a $5 billion action plan to protect ocean health. For Pacific nations like Fiji, it pays to not overdevelop, keep the rest of the economy strong, and have a differentiating factor. Cheng Lei, CGTN in Fiji.
All right, then a quick run through some commodity prices here for you. Brent crude is still sputtering along, sort of in the low 70s range. 7.50 was the relevant price at 16.50 GMT, barely 1% higher in the day. Platinum stocks at the JSE, they had a really decent Friday. Amplats, for instance, was up 1.7%. Futures on the metal were also having a good day, up nearly 2% to $871. You're looking at an 8% year-to-date gain. Coffee prices, well, they're not doing particularly well. They just keep falling, down 0.6% today in New York at about 16.17 GMT. The year-to-date loss there, and it doesn't seem to stop, is nearly 16%. Here's what's coming up next. We'll explore why Nigeria is seeing an increasing number of startups gunning for millions of online sales at home and abroad.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Kanata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, Nigeria is a market that if you're doing business anywhere in sub-Saharan Africa, you really can't overlook it. Its e-commerce industry, for instance, is forecast to become a major player in the country's economy in the next 6 years. The country's online startup firms are making inroads not just domestically, but also in the global e-commerce market. Here's CGTN's Phil Ihaza with that story on Grassroots tonight.
Lee Osha is the CEO of Swift Grocers, an online grocery shop that delivers food items to customers instantly. It's been just 2 years since she started the business, and the future is looking bright.
We service mostly mothers, bankers, professionals who do not have time to go to the open market. So yes, it's actually very lucrative, and there's a very big market for it. So when people place orders, we get from the physical store, then we have our dispatch riders who go to swiftly dispatch these groceries to our customers.
According to a London-based economist intelligence unit, the e-commerce industry in Nigeria is valued at over $13 billion and projected to reach $75 billion by 2025. And with companies like Swift Grocers tapping into the needs of a rapidly growing tech-savvy population, that may be good news for Nigeria's struggling oil-dependent economy.
I shop online because it's fast, it's easy, and they are reliable. Because of my baby, it's convenient for me. I don't have to take her under the sun to go get foodstuff and all.
Many tech startups are beginning to spring up across the country, partly thanks to the success stories of Jumia, a top e-commerce brand in Nigeria that just last month got listed into the New York Stock Exchange, a first ever feat by any African tech firm.
Job creation, swift business transactions, and export of local brands are just some of the benefits of e-commerce to Nigeria's economy. But experts say more needs to be done to help tackle the setbacks in the sector.
Our major challenge in e-commerce business is mainly power supply, that is electricity. Cybercrime as well. Cybercrime is really eating us deep. What government need to do is to create a body, thereby they verify and check these e-commerce businesses.
So while it's hoped the government will tackle some of these challenges and help the sector thrive, those already working in these businesses are keeping their sights fixed on satisfying millions of online customers at home and abroad. Phil Ihaza, CGTN Abuja, Nigeria.
All right, then a quick run through the currencies for you. Now, South Africa, of course, is going to the polls next week, Wednesday. And even the rand, even after today's gain of about 1.3% of the dollar, 14.3516 was a relevant number a little earlier in the day, it's still pretty much flat on a year-to-date basis. The currency essentially is in wait-and-see mode, depending on the outcome of the polls, with some analysts forecasting a possible move into the high 1380s range by the end of the year, but that depends on how big a margin the ANC will win by. Those are your currencies, and that's it for tonight's edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen here in the last hour. There's several ways of getting your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Ramah Nyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.